This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. Communities across North Dakota can see big possibilities for education, infrastructure, conservation, and more. The state's oil and natural gas industry helps make them happen. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Welcome to Plain Talk. I like to think that we're coming out of the pandemic era. It's still very much with us. There are still people getting sick. There are unfortunately still people dying. But the vaccines being rolled out, North Dakota's so far one of the best states in the nation in getting that vaccine into people's bodies and hopefully creating some immunity from this virus. But as things roll on, there is some public policy challenges that we still need to address. One of them is the question of liability for businesses, which, let's face it, both businesses and state, political leaders like Governor Doug Burgum, city commissions and mayors and of our communities have had to walk a tightrope between, obviously addressing the fact that there's a very real public health emergency out there, and the fact that, if you can't just order people's businesses closed without having some economic ramifications that are, I would argue, in some ways as dire as the threat of the virus itself. So, as we've walked that tightrope, there comes the question of liability. To what extent can business owners or people who operate public facilities be held accountable if someone gets sick while working at a business, say, or maybe just patronizing a business? There's legislation in Bismarck that seeks to address some of this. House Bill 1175, introduced by State Representative Michael Howe of Fargo, has already passed the State House. House Bill 1376 has been passed out of committee. There was a third one, House Bill 1271, that's already been voted down in the House. It kind of seems like consensus is forming around House Bill 1175. Anyway, here to talk to me about all of this is Allison Ritter. She's a spokesperson for the NFIB, the National Federation of Independent Businesses. Allison, how are you?
Hey, how's it going, Rob? Thanks for having me on.
Why do we need this legislation?
Well, I think it's pretty simple. It comes down to that businesses need protection from lawsuits. As long as they acted in good faith, did the best they could with the information that they had to protect their employees, to protect people that come to their business, they should have some sort of protection as a small business.
I think that makes sense to most people, and it certainly makes sense to me. But what about people out there who are saying, well, listen, what if a business defied local close orders or otherwise took activity and people got sick, like employees got sick or people got sick? What about them? I mean, shouldn't they be held liable?
Absolutely. And so, this legislation isn't saying that someone can't bring a lawsuit against someone who was malicious or negligent or, just had a blatant disregard for others. So there's nothing in this legislation that's preventing a lawsuit, but there just has to be a really high bar to sustain one. So if you're doing what you should have been doing, acting in good faith, following, state and federal orders to protect your employees, and protect those that are coming into your business or your residence or the owner of or coming into your building, that those people who are really acting in good faith should be protected from any type of lawsuit.
So, as a practical matter, how does this work? How does the bill? I mean, walk us through some of the mechanics and a real world example of how this might protect a business owner.
Sure. I think the real world example that we all can relate to in North Dakota is shoveling our sidewalks, right? We all know that when it snows and when it's icy, we need to shovel our walkways. We need to put out de-icer. We need to protect those who are coming into our home, our residence, or our business by following those standards that have been set, right? But every once in a while, there is someone out there that's not going to shovel, not going to put out de-icer. And yes, absolutely, those folks should be held liable. But if you're acting in good faith, if you're providing the equipment that you could at the time, masks, hand sanitizer, what have you, then in the real world, you should be protected from any type of lawsuit. So it really is a no-brainer. It just makes sense to protect these businesses, protect them on costs, because really the NFIB represents more than 2,000 small businesses in North Dakota. The average member has about 10 employees with a gross sales around $500,000 per year. So they can't really afford these types of lawsuits if someone would come in and try to say that they were negligent and acting with malicious intent. Like I said, there's not saying you can't bring a lawsuit, but there really has to be a high bar to sustain one. And for the folks that were doing it right, following the steps, doing what the state and local governments were ordering, they should be protected. And it's not just North Dakota that is passing this kind of legislation. This is being done all over the country, so clearly there's a need for it. This legislation was modeled after my home state of Iowa, so that makes me smile just a little bit. And so it really shows that there is a need for this out there. And our members are in favor of this. Nearly 94% of our members are saying, we need some sort of protection. And 1175 was really the vehicle that the NFIB and many other business associations got behind.
We already do a version of this, right? I mean, businesses are open. The world can be a risky place. Stuff happens, right? You can get hurt. Accidents happen. So the question is always like, where does the line of liability lie? And what we don't have on the books is really something that addresses the very unique circumstance of what we've all been living through, which is the pandemic. But I really like your snow shoveling example, because I think obviously everybody should be making a good faith effort to clear their walks. Like if you own a business, you need to make sure the sidewalk outside is shoveled, your parking lot's clear, you got de-icer down. You've got to take some good faith efforts, make some good faith efforts to protect your customers, people coming in. That being said, we all know that when a North Dakota winter really gets going and the wind's blowing so you just can't keep up with it, right? Or it's sleeting outside. There are weather conditions at times you just can't keep up with. So, as long as you can demonstrate that you've made good faith efforts to clear your sidewalk or clear your driveway or to de-ice, if somebody slips and falls, you're not necessarily liable, right? If you've been making the good faith efforts, because sometimes accidents just happen. That's kind of what we're saying with this legislation, right? If you were cleaning, if you were following the guidelines put in place by, your city, the state government, the federal government, whatever jurisdiction is applicable, if you were following those policies, if you were making good faith efforts and somebody still got sick, what this bill says is you're not necessarily liable, which is a protection businesses need, because that's really what this gets down to is trying to mitigate some of the risk business owners face when it comes to opening during the pandemic. Because I'll tell you, I'm sure as heck glad some of these businesses stayed open. I don't know where we'd be if the grocery stores hadn't stayed open. We would have been in a world of hurt.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head in your open when you talked about the tightrope that not only policymakers were on, but business owners making that tough decision. Do I stay open? And if I do, what do I need to do to protect everyone? I sit on the board for my local wrestling club, right? And this was a decision that we had to think about as well. How are we going to protect our wrestlers? How are we going to protect our parents if we decide to reopen and actually try to have our club this year? And, we put out hand sanitizer. We have masks. We ask that parents wear masks when they come in. We applied for grants from the state to put in, filters in our building. So we walked through those good faith efforts, and we tried to make every attempt to protect folks when they come in and if they choose to wrestle. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is that if you can demonstrate and show that you did the best you could, then you should be protected. And since we did that, we're excited we get to have a wrestling season this year, that's for sure, since it was cut short. And I think business owners are really in the same boat. They're walking that tightrope, trying to make the best decisions they can. And this is for people's livelihoods. People's livelihoods are on the line. Jobs are on the line. It's not as simple as just, having little wrestlers come in, right? Like as a hobby. This is people's livelihoods that we need to protect and jobs that we need to protect.
There is some opposition to the bill. It didn't pass unanimously in the House. Some of the complaints I've heard from people are that this is just about protecting business owners at the expense of customers. Address some of that for me.
Well, customers would be protected under this.
Or maybe employees too is the other side of that coin, that it's business owners, employers put their workers at risk, said, hey, you have to come in and work amid a pandemic, and
right.
you put those workers at risk, and now we're just going to protect the businesses. I don't agree with that argument, but it's out there, and how do you address it?
Sure. So there was that discussion on the floor, but that was kind of rebuked, that there are protections for employees within this, that if their business owner was, providing those materials to them, then they would be protected. So there was a little back and forth, but I think it was addressed pretty well on the floor that this bill would cover those employees.
I think there comes also a time where you just have to acknowledge that life is risk. No decent person, which is most of us, wants their employees to get sick. No decent person wants their customers to get sick. But business owners also. So it's that balancing act. We know what the risks are. We do our best to mitigate them. We do our best to be safe. And as long as you're doing your best to be safe and you're following the proper guidelines, it is what it is. Life is risk. There's just a certain amount of risk, and we can't eliminate. I guess we could eliminate it if we all just stayed home and laid in bed all day.
Stayed in a bubble, right?
Right.
And jobs depend on this. There's businesses that really depend on having protection, because they did walk that tightrope of trying to stay open when they could, doing what they can, because they still need to earn a living. They still need to pay their employees. And North Dakota is business friendly. North Dakota wants to walk that tightrope as far as protecting individuals and protecting the health and well-being of our citizens, but also having an economy that can stay afloat and keep jobs and businesses open. And so I think this bill does a good job of, providing that certainty to businesses, because that's a big thing to businesses, is having that certainty that they can stay open. And as long as they're doing what they should, as far as following federal and state and local orders, then they're going to be protected.
Well, that's it. And let's face it. I mean, part of this too, there's an industry of lawyers out there who would love to file all sorts of lawsuits against businesses, because, win or lose, a lot of times they make money. And, and again, we want to leave the avenue open for appropriate litigation for people who did legitimately act irresponsibly. But I think it's also responsible to put in place some protections for people who did act responsibly, who did their best, and maybe something bad happened anyway. So at some point, I think you just kind of have to say, well, that's life. It's tough and nobody likes it, but it is what it is.
Right. And it kind of goes back to like what you said, just, okay, we could take all that away and just live in a bubble and, nothing bad would ever happen, but that's not realistic. So let's protect those that are really creating our jobs and making our economy what it is. And this is the best way to do that.
So forecast this for me. This sailed through the House. Do you see any problems in the Senate?
There's such strong support from businesses throughout the state. Like I said, 94% of our members in North Dakota see the need for this. So I would really hope that those on the Senate side recognize that this is being done all over the country. Nothing has happened yet at the federal level, despite attorney generals asking for this, to be passed at the federal level. So we really need to do something here in North Dakota, and there is such an overwhelmingly majority of support behind this. I would see there being a really hard time with something going down in the Senate and going down in flames. So I would hope they would get behind it. It's the legislature, so you never know what could happen, but there's such support and such a need for this bill. I'd be really surprised if it went down in flames.
Allison, thanks for your time.
Hey, Rob, thanks for having me on. It's good to hear from you, and glad to hear that you've recovered from having coronavirus yourself.
Well, if anybody could speak to the risks of coronavirus, I guess I can. It almost killed me, so it's it.
I can't believe that. I'm so glad you recovered.
Certainly. Well, thank you, Allison, for your time.